Howdy, Jade Shadows has finally arrived, and I'm finally back to having stuff to do, stuff to test, stuff to find that's entertaining and juicy. Blast damage is very, very strong now, and we're doing a Tenet Glaxion build with it, as well as testing out some other cold stuff and just generally showing off how crazy the gun is now. I figured it would be pretty strong, and I mentioned it in the first Tenet Glaxion video, but now that it's out and all the changes happened, I can actually show it. So the first thing I want to show with Tenet Glaxion would be Shivering Contagion. So this is a mod that you get from somewhere. I'm actually unsure. I can't remember where you get this from. Shivering Contagion. Well, I'm sure you can find it on the wiki. It doesn't take much effort. Enemies affected by cold status have a 30% chance to spread that status to other enemies within 6 meters. Well, Tenet Glaxion already has a pretty snazzy thing where it can chain link between enemies. Now, in case some people haven't seen Tenet Glaxion before, right, they don't know what it does or whatever, I'll show it off real quick. So we're going to switch this. I have nothing on other than, like, of course, arcane. So if I shoot an enemy, it's going to chain up to 3 enemies, I believe. Yes, 3 enemies. And each enemy hits after the first enemy. Yeah, 1, 2, 3. Each enemy hit after the first one is going to take half the damage of the previous enemy, and it cannot get headshots. So if I hit this guy, it's 100. It chains this guy 50%, 25% on this guy, and then this is the last chain doing 12.5% damage. So not like insane damage, but it is nice, especially for spreading status effects. So it can be very nice. Now you can increase that with punch through. So if I come over here and I slap on a mod that gives punch through, like Prime Shred for example, plus 2.2 punch through. If I hit another enemy, it will chain even more. So it's kind of hard to tell at times. So we're gonna try to chain like this way. You can see there's enough beams chaining around that. Yeah, there we go. I hit 5 other enemies. So the beams can hit the same enemy. Like if I chain to this enemy without punch through, it can chain to this guy, right? And it can chain to this guy, but it cannot chain back to this guy. But that does not apply to the punch through of the beam. So if I shoot this enemy and it punches through to this enemy, it can chain to this enemy from this enemy, and then this one that's punching through to hit again, it can also chain to this guy. So 2 of the beams are hitting them. There is a cap on the chains though. There can only be 2 beam chains at once, so you only need to be able to punch through 1 target. Otherwise, there would be way more beam chaining, and that would be insane. So punch through is valuable in the weapon. If you have Prime Shred, I would use it, and if you don't, I would use normal Shred. That's also an option here. But if you don't care much about it, I mean, it's nice, but it's not required. I personally like it, but you don't have to run it, punch through on the weapon. So, back to this build. I do have Magnetic as a progenitor, which is nice because Magnetic is actually useful now, and it can, help against Overguard. When it depletes the Overguard and stuff, it does an electric burst, same for when breaking shields. But it's also just an extra element to have for if I'm using Galvanized Aptitude, so that's nice. Now, the reason Shivering Contagion is nice here is because the weapon already chains a beam, and it has cold damage at base. So we already have cold, we have chaining, we have punch through now with Prime Shred, which gives even more chaining as well. So we're going to be able to apply cold to all of the enemies very, very fast. And the reason it is better now than it was before the Jade Shadows update is because cold damage got buffed. Previously, 9 stacks was the cap to cold, and at 9 stacks the enemy was slowed by 90% of their movement speed, I believe. Whereas now 10 stacks is the cap, and at 10 stacks the enemy is frozen solid. Now, when you have cold applied to the enemy, it increases the damage, or the crit damage bonus an enemy receives, up to 50% at 9 stacks before Jade Shadows, but now it goes up to 10 stacks when they're frozen solid. It doubles from 50 to 100%, and that is additive to mods like Vital Sense. So that's 100% additive crit damage to your mods. That's very nice to have, on top of them just being frozen solid, so they literally can't do anything to attack you. and it is bonus crit damage on the enemy. So while I could be wrong about this, if I had to guess, it likely applies to abilities that can get crits as well. So that would be very snazzy for, like, you know, some sort of Frost and Breach Surge build. It could be really good. But we'll go over, like, status effects in general in another video maybe. So since we can chain and hit so many enemies, all of them getting applied by cold can then spread it from Shivering Contagion. So look at how fast we can freeze these enemies solid. Look at that. Almost instantly. As soon as I start shooting them, look at that. Frozen solid. It is so... Do you see that? It froze nearly the entire group of enemies. Look at that. That is ridiculous. The amount of crowd control you can get from this thing now is insane. I just shoot all around. Look. Frozen enemies. All frozen. It's incredible. I freaking love it. Now, you saw the build. This is just a typical cold corrosive build. It's still pretty good. And after the armor changes, it's actually better than it was before. We don't have any stacks yet. Keep that in mind. Now we're going to be building up our galvanized aptitude so that we get our flat damage. And one more stack, right? Yeah, there we go. 3 stacks is the max, I believe. Oh no, 2 was. Oh no, we're still building up our multi-shot though. Now look at that. I'd say that's pretty good damage for also being able to freeze entire groups of enemies solid with very, very little effort or time. I'm very much enjoying this weapon. It is probably going to be my most used primary fairly soon because I already love Glaxion, but now it's just insane. Like, look at this. The freezing. It's beautiful. But this is not the only option. You can actually run Blast on this thing. And Blast damage is pretty insane now as well. So, in case you didn't know, before I state the things about Blast, they also changed armor. Armor now caps out at 90% damage reduction. And... Sorry, someone was yelling. It caps out at 90% damage reduction. I believe it's 90% at like 2700 armor. And to compensate, they also increased enemy health, how it scales with enemy level. So in the low end, it's not going to make that much of a difference, honestly, a lot of the time. Oh, they also made armor scale linearly, I think, right? Like, if you remove 90% of their armor... Okay, if an enemy has 90% damage reduction, and I remove 90% of their armor, now they should only have 9% damage reduction, because it's not top, or like bottom heavy as it was before. Whereas before Jade Shadows, if an enemy had 90% damage reduction from like almost 3k armor, and I removed 90% of their armor instead of having 9% damage reduction left over, they would still have like, what, 50% damage reduction? Something like that. So you don't have to full strip enemies for armor strip to be valuable. It will always be a nice damage increase, but it also means it isn't necessary as much as it used to be. Still important, but not necessary 100% of the time. So that also makes blast damage or gas, that kind of stuff, much better. But blast is what I'm mainly interested in. So this is a blast build. We have Deadhead here because it's nice and we can't use Frostbite if we're not using cold. We are going with Toxin? No, we actually want to switch. You can go Toxin Blast or Cold Blast or Corrosive Blast. However, on this build, I can't really give up any of the mods that I want without losing out on too much, so we don't run Corrosive here. But it is an option if you wanted. So here we go. We are going Electric and Blast damage, and then Magnetic is at base. So Blast, now what it does is a blast deals 30% of base damage after 1.5 seconds as an explosion. At 10 stacks or on death, stacks deal their damage simultaneously to enemies within 5 meters while staggering them. What that means pretty much is it's kind of like a DOT. If you don't hit 10 stacks, that's going to deal some of the damage, right? Like if I look, I hit 6 blast, give it a second, and it all explodes rapidly. It's like a DOT with a 1.5 second delay. But if you hit 10 stacks, instead of having, like, it takes a delay before it explodes, it all detonates immediately, and it does in a much larger AoE. So, like, look at the tiny AoE on that. But then if we hit 10, look, it's able to tag enemies from farther because it's 5 meters instead. I'd say the normal base AoE is probably like 1.5 meters if I had to guess. Don't quote me on that though. Now, it also does the same thing if the enemy dies, right? Like if the enemy dies at 7 stacks, then all the stacks will instantly detonate. So that's nice because it's base damage. Another thing, don't quote me on this, but I don't think it scales by increasing the elemental damage. It's only going to scale by base damage, just like gas. So think of it very similarly to gas damage, right? It's very similar to how gas works. But we can pair it with electricity, which chains between enemies for even more damage. Now, another thing that makes blast damage better than it used to be is they changed skin types. Before, blast dealt negative damage to armor. That's no longer a thing. There's no longer like a million different types of skins and armor types and stuff. It's literally just faction types. A damage type will deal more or less damage to a faction. That's it. End of discussion. There's nothing else affecting it, which is so very nice. It makes things much more simple. So if you want to know if you're getting bonus damage or negative damage on a faction from an element, just look at it, right? It's super easy to see. All of the normal status effects, the singular ones like Toxin, Electric, Heats, Cold, and then any of the IPS, right? Impact, Puncture, Slash. From what I can tell, after looking at them, they all have positives, right? They have 2 positives. None of them deal negative damage types. Whereas mixed elements do. They have 2 enemies or 1 where they deal bonus damage and 1 where they will deal negative damage. Not that big of a deal, but it is something you should keep in mind sometimes, depending on what you're fighting. Anyways, super far off topic, but I think the context is important to know why Blast is actually good now, instead of where it used to be, which it was raging to do. But because we're able to hit so many enemies, and Blast can explode in a big AoE, and Electric can chain, now we have absurd AoE on this thing. So let's go ahead and reset these enemies. Now again, until we get 1 kill, we don't have Galvanized Aptitude up, but after that, we should be doing some very juicy damage. See, without the kill yet though, our damage is a very big yikes, because we have no armor strip and we have no viral damage either. So to make things easier, I can just armor strip. That's not the right thing. Hang on a second. We're gonna switch to Uneru so that I can easily armor strip them, so that I can build up my stacks without this taking 9 years. There we go. Did I? Dang, I did tag that guy. Oh well, it's fine. So we try to get a headshot kill because I have Deadhead. I don't think I got a headshot kill. Son of a son. Dang. Well, even without getting the Deadhead stacks, our damage is still going to be decent. But I really need that Deadhead proc. There we go, there we go. There's 1 Deadhead. This is... Look at this. Do you see that AoE? That's some insane AoE right there. Deadhead might actually not be the best option here because it's quite difficult to proc. If I were to run something, it would be Primary Blight, because Primary Blight gives multi-shots and crit damage, I believe. And all you have to do is proc Toxin from the weapon. So you can run Toxin instead of Electric. So you go Toxin, Electric, and Blast. And then you'll be able to not even have to get kills other than for Galvanized Aptitude. That would make life much easier. But the fact that this is Blast and we have no viral and no armor strip is just insane to me. I never thought the day would come where Blast was viable. Like, look at the damage. Now that we have our stacks built up, the AoE we can get from this thing is ridiculous. If you had a Riven that had like 2 elements on it, so you could easily get Corrosive Blast on this at the same time, that would be very, very strong. If you wanted to like use Nourish, add Viral in, or you have Armor Strip, like I'm on Hildred right now, I don't have enough strength to like full armor strip, but let's say we strip there, half their armor. Even half their armor is going to make a huge difference. Look at that. That's crazy. I only stripped half their armor. It's beautiful. So just imagine if you had Corrosive on this thing. Even with the 1 dispo, just because you could get 2 elements on 1 mod, I think a Riven would be very good on this thing. I would want one that was built for either, actually not blast, because I want higher blast weighting. I would want a Riven with Toxin, Electric, and then honestly, I don't even care what the rest is. Just those two is going to increase the damage to such an insane degree, right? It's going to be crazy, which is very, very snazzy. Now, on top of that, I want to show with grouping. So we're going to grab Rhino. Nothing affecting our damage. I'm not casting Roar here. I'm just using Ensnare. So we respawn these enemies. Come back over here. Armor strip the first few so we can actually get our stacks up. I stripped 4 of them. More than I wanted, but not the end of the world. Again, Blight would be so much better than Deadhead here. But ya boy ain't got Blight. I sold it like a dumbass. Blast, just like Gas, because it's an AoE, if you can apply it to a big group of enemies, it means you're going to be able to absolutely decimate them. And you don't have to wait on the damage over time like Gas. It's pretty instant for the most part. Like, it's a lot of damage if you ask me. Now, you can also still run a Gas cold build, just like I showed in my previous video on this weapon. Here, instead of having to switch that over, we can actually just switch one mod over on this build instead. Shabam. Now I have Gas and Cold, and we still have Shivering Contagion. Because Gas no longer deals negative damage to armor, so if we go and we look at it, Gas does 1.5 times damage to Infested on Deimos. Oh, this doesn't deal negative to anything. Literally no negative damage to any faction types at all. That's pretty freaking juicy if you ask me. And armor doesn't scale nearly as hard. Gas was not directly touched, but it got buffed. Very, very heavily passively buffed by all of the other changes that happened in the update. So we want to get kills first, of course. And Deadhead is nice here. Oh wait, I have Frostbite on still, don't I? Okay, you can run Frostbite instead of Deadhead, but I prefer Deadhead here because the bonus headshot multiplier applies to Gas Clouds. Gas Clouds can get headshots, but they have a base headshot multiplier of 1.0, so it literally does no extra crit damage, or sorry, headshot damage. But if you add headshot multiplier into it, like 30%, putting at 1.3, now we get more damage from our Gas Clouds on their headshots. So that's very nice and very much worth doing if you ask me. So we got to get our stacks up as always. All these enemies are going to be frozen all the time though. Look at that. As our stacks go up. Now, look at this. This is a beam weapon with gas. No armor strip. And no viral. I know it's not melting them, but if you go back and like look at one of my older videos where I was using this, I think I showed it off without armor strip or anything in my previous Tenet Glaxion video. It couldn't even kill these guys. Like, I could empty 5 mags into an enemy and they wouldn't, to these exact same enemies, and they would not be dead. Whereas now I can kill an enemy in just like, I can probably kill 5-6 enemies in a single magazine from all the chaining and stuff. That's a pretty huge change. And more importantly, is because it does that, well, obviously, just like Blast, that means grouping is going to be even more effective than before. Like, you thought Gas killed grouped enemies fast before? Just look at it now. It's going to destroy these guys. Question mark. Why do I feel like it's doing absolutely nothing here? Okay, now it's starting to do damage. Wow, that was pretty funny. I said it would destroy them and then proceeded to not destroy them. I need you to point and laugh as you should. Let's try that again. I have my stacks right, yes. Yes, yes. We do still not have viral or anything though, but it should be applied to all of them. Look at that. This is a beam weapon. Okay? If you don't know how gas works, you probably won't be, like, surprised by that. Gas is capped out at 10 stacks. but it deals damage based off your base damage and is multiplied by, you know, crits and damage and all headshot multiplier if you have it, all the typical stuff, right? But since it caps out 10 stacks, that means low damage, high fire rate weapons, like beam weapons, pretty much suck with gas almost 100% of the time. But because gas does so much more damage now to armored enemies like that, it actually works. It's actually viable. And that was still, like, no armor stripper viral. We can easily add armor stripper viral into the mix. Like, let's say we put on Panzervolpavila. It's that simple. Just slap that on. Or Nourish, since like 95% of people in this game have Nourish on all of their frames. Not hard to get either one of those things, armor strip or viral, onto the enemy. So we build up our stacks again. We only need like 3 deadhead. Viral spreads. Pull them into the center. And now look. Beautiful. Absolutely glorious. I love how this ice is just bugged out, stuck frozen there. It's pretty funny. But yeah, that's gonna be it for Glaxion, I guess, right? I just wanted to show that it's really freaking snazzy now. It's beautiful. Oh, actually, I didn't show the blast build with the viral, because I think that's also worth showing. Not grouping just blast while they're not grouped with viral from Panzer, right? Because, you know, again, super easy to do. It destroyed them before, but now we'll definitely destroy them. The damage, oh my god, the damage. We haven't even built all our stacks up yet. Look at that. Look at this. It's insane. I think Blast has a lot of value now. It's not good on every weapon, but the weapons it is good on, it can really, really shine. It's so juicy. So yeah, that's gonna be it for the Tenet Glaxion post Jade Shadows video. If you liked, then subscribe and leave a like on the video. That'd be very epic. Adios.